So, Johan, have you ever been fired?
Well, actually, I have.
Well, I know that. It's a silly sort of question. I know, but I think the funny thing is that you've been fired, I think, by your current employer. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. How did it happen? Or maybe the sports reporter sort of, how did it feel?
Well...
Was it on a Friday, by the way? Did it happen on a Friday?
I can't remember.
That was the feeling.
Well, I didn't feel very well. I have to say I was a bit disappointed because it happened just a few months after my employment started. So
this was part of a sort of a larger downscaling sort of thing then.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So in today's podcast of the 4 speeches, we'll look at what we call the executioner speech. A speech where the leader brings suffering by the very words he or she speaks, announcing budget cuts, cutting off a project, or letting people go. But before we get down to business, let's start in the more loftier registers and ask, have you ever wanted to travel to the moon?
Well, actually not. I've been more fond of the red planet.
Mars.
Yes, I want to go to Mars.
Well, maybe you could have join up with Elon Musk. In January 2019, SpaceX inventor Elon Musk he's created a dream team for space travels, and the plan is to do it sometime in March 2024. SpaceX announced that they would lay off 10% of their workforce, and the workers were told to leave work early and check their emails. So basically an executioner speech. But before we get to that actual layoff speech or announcement, a few words about Tesla and Elon Musk. Well, they presented their long-awaited pickup, the Cybertruck, now in November 2019 in the LA. But it didn't quite go as planned, did it?
No, because it was announced as unbreakable, although it turned out it was breakable after all. The window glass was broken.
Yes, and how did it was from some sort of they were throwing things at the window, and before that they used a sledgehammer, and there was some sort of.
Yes, well, that's the explanation afterwards. Yeah. But what we saw was a test. They wanted us to see how unbreakable it was, and one of the chief designers threw a stone or stone-like ball onto the window, and it broke.
It must be,
and it broke 2 times.
2 times. Extremely embarrassing. But back to the layoff announcement. It's with all layoff speeches or executioner speeches, they are not very likely to be live speeches. More often they come in the form of a press release or an email or a notice. So it seems like distance matters in some way with these.
Well, yes, it does.
Yeah, so it is. So. And even more so, this layoff notice that we look at was not delivered by Musk himself, but by a representative. And we have the announcement provided to us by Business Insider, so given then by a SpaceX representative. And if we look at the announcement, it's very short. It's not a long speech in that sense. And I guess executioner speeches are usually quite short, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they should be.
They should be short. Why is that?
Well, to do cuts, to do harmful things to your workforce is a thing that involves quite a lot of risk, and it's like when you go to do some surgeon's work.
Yeah, you want it to do happen. You wanted to cut quickly, do it deep, and do it at once.
Yes, you don't want many cuts.
You don't want the surgeon to. I'll stay in here for a few days and check out how it feels.
No.
So you want it to happen swiftly.
Yes.
So the notice, we looked at in our previous podcast, in looking at the opening speech, the strategy of naming. So naming yourself first, then naming reality, and then naming who we are, and then finally naming the course. There's not much naming yourself in the speech itself, but in some sense, the naming yourself comes with a power that is assigned to the person who sends it. So someone's in a position where they're able to fire people. Is that right?
Yes, and to carry out an executioner speech, your position is that it immediately presupposes power. You have the power to let people go, for example, or to take a tough decision. You're high on potestas. That is the formal power to bind people or bind other people with your decision, and that's the who you are in that sense.
Yeah. So let's get to the actual announcement then. It's pretty short. I'll read it. It goes like this: to continue delivering for our customers and to succeed in developing interplanetary spacecraft and a global space-based internet, SpaceX must become a leaner company. Well, that's many similar announcements have started in the same way. The idea of the being lean. So there's a sort of analogy here with the body.
Yes. Yes. Too much fat.
Yeah.
You have to cut it away.
Yeah.
But it frames the it is the rationale for letting people go. You're too fat. You have to cut.
Yes. You have to. The past, or the reality of the past, is that we or you or this company is too fat in a sense, and now we have to become leaner. And that happens not in a long process of losing weight, to use the analogy, but it happens by cutting off.
Yes, it's more of a operation than a process of eating less fat food.
Yeah, and it goes on. Either of these developments, well, I guess that points to the idea of interplanetary spacecraft and the global space-based internet, even when attempted separately, have bankrupted other organizations. So that's, once again, the rationale, the reason for doing this. A sort of naming reality, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. In order to accomplish what they've trying to accomplish, to get to the point, to the goal, they have to lose some weight.
But if we look at an executioner speech, it's in some sense it's directed to the future because there's something you want to happen in the future. But mainly it's directed to the past and arguing why there are things in the past. There is some sort of verdict in a sense that over the past that you have to. That's why we have to execute. That's why we have to cut, kill, whatever verb you use for this. So here they look at the past, saying that people who've tried this before, trying both to do a global space-based internet and interplanetary spacecraft, they're bankrupted. So there's a reason here for being lean or becoming leaner.
Yes. And the failed things of the past should be avoided in the future.
Yes. So if this was another company, it would be a point to, once again, point to the past and say, hey, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we need to take account of. And then, based on that, say, that's why the verdict goes like this. So in more rhetorical terms, the executioner speech is what sort of speech then?
It's a forensic speech.
Yeah. So
you have to defend based on the experience. We have made a decision, namely to cut in our body, to lose some weight, and we are now defending that decision. That is the the rhetorical force or the rhetorical aspect of this layoff
notice. Yeah. So the next sentence goes like this. I find it very interesting. This means we must part ways with some talented and hardworking members of our team. Could this be read as a sort of attempt to name who we are in a way, or how should we read this? Because it's almost like it's, and this must be the challenge for a leader who's executing a verdict like this, that you're a lone rider in a sense. You can't really be friends with those you cut off.
Yes, but I think the intention here is not to pick out the most talented and those who have been working the hardest and to say that to them, well, I think we will cut. No, but it's the idea of saying still we don't want to say to you that you are in a sense lazy or not talented, but it is to sharpen the attention to those who remain in the company and to say to them, you are even more talented and you are even more hardworking because you have not been cut off or cut away. You are not being laid off, but you're still with us. So
in a sense, the audience of an executioner speech, that's the people who stay on, not the people who are laid off, to put it that way.
Yes, the immediate audience is of course those who are being laid off, but the intended audience, I think is those who remain, because they will be affected by the anxiety and fear created by this layoff.
Am I next, for instance?
Exactly, and that's the problem. In all revolutions since the French, namely, am I the next to go to the guillotine?
Exactly.
And here they try to say by letting go of some people, what remains might be
strong enough,
yes, to live on and to reach the goal that they have set themselves.
So, in one sense, that is supposed to contribute to this naming of who we are, those of us who are staying on, in a sense.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. But talking a bit about the role of the leader, this idea of friendship is symmetrical in its sort of, we're even. But I guess for many leaders, giving an executioner speech, whether it's cutting a project or laying one person off or announcing that you no longer work here, must be tough, because you're in that, I'm not saying ivory tower, but you're in a position by yourself. You have to do it because it's your potestas, it's your responsibility.
Yes, you are given the not only the authority but also the decisive power to make the cuts that you think is necessary for the firm or for the company or for the state, in order to accomplish its main goal. And that is not just to keep people busy with work, but to accomplish certain thing that might be very costly, very difficult to achieve. And so in order to reach that goal, people have invested decisive power, or potestas, as you name it. And with that potestas, you should make cuts when they are when it's necessary to do them.
Yeah, and the necessity of those costs, the sort of the rhetorical rationale for that is found in the way you describe the past. So here they say that these developments, even when attempted separately, the developments of developing interplanetary spacecraft and global space-based internet, have bankrupted other organizations. And that's a very short story. It's very concise. You say, this is what it's about. And as a leader, you can always point to, well, that's the reason. That's why. This is it.
Yes. And the good thing about this, or the rhetorical value it has, is that it actually points not just to budgetary sort of vague abstract ideas, but it is a concrete past, and it says, well, people have failed in it. This is a tough run. This is not easy. Yeah. And what we are trying to achieve here may come at high costs.
Yeah, and so it's naming reality in a very realistic way. It's not overly optimistic or anything. The next sentence goes like this: we're grateful for everything they've accomplished and their commitment to SpaceX mission. Basically, some of the same things, or a continuation of just a set of them being hardworking members of our team. But the interesting thing is, I think here, their commitment to SpaceX's mission. So here is a very careful introduction, I would say, of the vision, or you could say the course or the legacy of this organization.
Yes, because they have not merely done their job. It says it, but they have been really giving themselves to this idea, to the cause of sending people to Mars, and I think this is a different and more, should we say, visionary way of speaking about employers, even employers who are being laid off, because it's not just about doing the job that you are paid for, but it's giving yourself to a larger cause.
Exactly.
The cause of the company or the firm.
And this is a lofty cause. You want a space-based internet and you want to go to Mars. So people who join this, they should be aware of this being not a regular sort of job thing.
Well, yes,
I would argue.
That's true. But every attempt to create something is also involved with very the banality of administration and so forth. Yeah. So the old story about two men carrying bricks in the Middle Ages is telling in this regard, because one of them says, I'm just carrying bricks, and the other says, I am building a cathedral.
So this is a bit of the cathedral, the hinting
exactly.
at the mission thing. So the last sentence here goes like this: this action, the layoff, is taken only due to the extraordinarily difficult challenges ahead, and would not otherwise be necessary. I think the word "necessary" here is key.
Yes, because to lay off core members or important staff members is a very, very risky thing to do for a company, and you shouldn't do it without explaining that it is necessary.
So when you deliver an executioner speech, which is usually not a speech in the live sense of the word, it could be in your office. You could have a worker come there and you'd tell him. You could also tell when you announce budget cuts. It's usually live. What is an execution? I mean, the verb itself, to execute, sort of hints at how dramatic it actually is to be a CEO. chief executive officer.
It means to kill.
It means to kill. So that means that if you're a CEO, you're someone with a license to kill, in a sense.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
And I think the ending of a story. I mean, what we read from Tesla and their space attempt or their space project, they are letting go of a lot of workers, and this is, it involves that they are sort of killing the contracts they have with these workers. So it's and it reminds us that the executioner speech, when you do that kind of thing, it is a kind of inflicting death on others. You end, so it's the story that,
and you're in the position to end something.
Exactly.
That's the key. You have the potestas to do it. Machiavelli, he gave some advice to the ruler in Florence, wasn't it, in medieval times, and he had some ideas of how a ruler should act when he inflicts wounds or executes.
Yes, in fact, he marks
which could be relevant for this, because it connects with some of the things we've seen here.
Yes, and I think with Machiavelli, he embodies the transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, where he sees the necessity of the executioner's speech, and the dramatic, the drama of making a revolution, namely to let people go, and the rationale you should give for doing that. And what he said was, even the most horrible things that a leader sometimes must do, it should be short, deep, and swift.
Yeah. So I think he has an expression that the leader or the prince, in this case, should not be left standing with a knife in his hand. So it's the image of the leader who, as you have to kill or you have to execute or inflict a taste of death, but you have to do that and then let the knife go. Is that sort of the idea? Because then people will be in constant fear.
Yes, and the traditional interpretation of the two great revolutions that we have seen, namely the French and the Russian Revolution, seen from Machiavelli's perspective, would be that the French failed because they kept on killing people all the time, many years. The Russians did it all at once, and therefore it was an infliction of death or execution in a very short time.
So towards the end of this podcast, some practical advice on the executioner speech. So we've already looked at how important it is to name the realities of the past that justifies the execution. I think it's also fair to say that it's important to stick to that story.
Exactly.
And before you decide what's going to be the reason, you have to make sure that this is the story. This is the story we're going to tell of why we execute this. Some would say that it's best to do an executioner speech on a Friday.
Yeah.
Why do you think that would be the case?
Well, that's shortly before the weekend, and you will then gain some distance, and the problem or the letting go would not be a theme for the whole week. You sort of send people home with a "don't return" message. And
another advice that you could hear would be, and this is linked to the fact that, as with every speech, the leader's credibility is at stake. So who do you fire? So are there any sort of loyalties? How are they played out? Do we recognize the rationale of of the sort of the story of the past, the story in who's going to be let off. So do you keep a friend who should actually be in the group? That would probably disturb.
Yeah, the problem is that if you make decisions based on friendship or corruption, that might also corrupt your story and your cause. The main thing I think for the executioner speech is to link the layoffs, the budget cuts, and so forth as closely as you can to the cause. It has to serve the cause, and it has to be probable.
It has to answer to the why of this organization.
Exactly.
Yeah. So why do we, as an organization, doing this as our prime thing, why do we have to cut like this? Isn't that right?
Yes, and it has to be the closer the link is between the cut or the letting go to the course of the company, the easier it is to make those cuts.
Exactly. So just to sum it up, a few the 7 keys to a successful executioner speech, as we find it. You need to name the reality of the past that justifies the execution. You need to stick to that story. And you shouldn't be left standing with a knife in your hand, as Machiavelli puts it. You need to execute the suffering short and swiftly. And number 4, you should be as precise as possible. This is not the speech where you have this sort of excessive metaphoric or whatever. You should be precise, also when it comes to offering the verdict. Number 5, offer comfort and care by appealing to a greater we that continues to live beyond the execution. That's the hard part, because you're not a friend. You could look at possibilities to utilize the legacy of the opening speech, and that is, as we spoke about it, and use it to make the executioner speech more credible. And if possible, you can name a revised course for the future, as we saw in the announcement from SpaceX. But if you do that, make it short and poignant. This was the executioner speech, a serious one, where our next podcast episode will be about the consolation speech, which is also definitely about suffering. In this case, with the executioner speech, it's about suffering that comes because the words you speak as a leader. And when we get to the consolation speech, we'll deal with the suffering that sort of comes from the outside more. So more about that in our next episode of the 4 speeches.